Well, I kept hearing how our world has changed. Everybody said that. Our world has changed since September 11. It was a terrible, cruel thing that happened. But there have been literally tens of thousands, in Mozambique hundreds of thousands, in Angola over 1 million people who've been killed by acts of terrorism, by state-sponsored U.S. terrorism, and the world didn't change. 3,000 Americans were killed, and the world changed. One writer said the universe has changed. I want to talk about that act of terrorism and its meaning and its significance and what we can say about it. If you believe the White House, that's a laugh line. I thought I'd get a laugh there. If you believe the White House, okay, and the corporate media, they tell us that September 11th happened because there were some crazed zealots driven by an evil doctrine, and they targeted the United States because it's such a free and prosperous country. Let's examine that. I think there's some truth in that, by the way. I think there's some truth in what George Bush said about this. I think even a broken clock is right twice a day. The perpetrators were indeed propelled by the fanatical conviction that they were operating directly under God's command. You know, one of the terrible things about human history is all these people who've been operating right under God's command, who have a direct trunk line to God, you know, cell phone. Oh, God? Yeah. And there's an age-old relationship between religion and violence that we ought to start recognizing. In History as Mystery, I deal with some of the myths, the early myths about the founding of Christianity. One, that it was nonviolent and all that sort of thing. A lot of people try to explain away the connection between religion and violence as an aberration. It's a kind of an odd infection by a deviant ideology, a fundamentalist strain, you know. But the truth of the matter is that the histories of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, all of them are tragically laced with violence and intolerance. Intolerance of other people, intolerance of other believers, intolerance of non-believers, intolerance of their own believers who might have a slightly different ritual, who use stained glass windows or don't use stained glass windows. Even Buddhism, which is always paraded as the one passive, peaceful religion. I mean, the history of Buddhism, Sri Lanka, Buddhists are killing Buddhists. Thailand, Buddhists are killing Buddhists or killing others. I mean, it's hard to say that, because I happen to live in a Buddhist country right now. It's called Berkeley, California. And I tell some of my friends, you know, ex-Westerners from Brooklyn who are now Buddhists, who sit and they say, my inner, deeper, usually accompanied with a claw-like gesture to the sternum. Inner, deeper. Get in touch with my inner spiritual child. I say, first of all, forget your inner child. Get in touch with your inner adult for a change, will you? There are too many inner childs roaming all over the place. We need more inner adult, you know, commitment, command, self-direction, determination. That's what we got to get in touch with. But I tell them, you know, Tibet has a terrible history of Buddhist armies fighting Buddhist armies for the land, or grabbing hold of feudal control of the land, and to who's going to exploit the peasantry more, who's going to round up the 9-year-old boys and bring them into the monastery for the relaxation and distraction of the devoted monks, and all that sort of thing that went on for, you know, a few centuries. And so this history of all these religions have been wrapped up or related in some way to violence. Think of, we don't have to go all the way to Tibet, think of our own country, the Christian fundamentalists here, these dedicated soldiers of Christ who bomb abortion clinics, who've killed several clinical workers and doctors. Think of Timothy McVeigh, who associated with a group that called itself Christian Identity, who killed 168 innocent people in the Oklahoma City terrorist bombing of 1995. McVeigh was convinced he was striking a blow at the federal government, at the Jews, liberals, and other secularists and humanists who had dislodged white Christian America from its really true spiritual moorings. I mean, he said that, you know. McVeigh's terrorism, it didn't cause the U.S. government to launch retaliatory airstrikes against the Christian Identity encampment in Elohim City on the Oklahoma-Arkansas border. It didn't cause them to attack the Montana militia units from which some of his sympathizers sprang. Nor did the feds round up Christian Identity members or various militiamen. Nor did they use racial profiling to detain hundreds of Irish Americans. Timothy McVeigh, it all begins to add up. Timothy McVeigh rhymes with IRA. It's I got it, let's go bomb Dublin. We're told that Islam preaches love and peace, and that terrorists who act in its name are violating its precepts. They represent an aberration. And indeed, many people in Islam and in other religions do find their religions a source of love and peace. It does move them to very valiant and charitable acts and wonderful things. But we can't divorce religion from the things that are done in its name. Just as we credit religion for acts of mercy and charity and generosity, so might we credit it for the acts of terror and bloody murder it has inspired throughout the ages. But why would the Islamic terrorists attack America in particular? Well, Bush said it because we're such a free and prosperous country. Well, we are relatively free and prosperous to some extent. By the way, I just had someone write to me, a student said, you find so many things wrong in your book, Democracy for the Few, with America and the American system, which, by the way, is in 7th edition, not 9th edition. It feels like the 9th edition for me, but it's only the 7th edition. He said, well, then why is this country the envy of the world? And capitalism has brought us such prosperity. Capitalism is a system that creates prosperity, he said. So I sent him back a little note about capitalist Nigeria, and capitalist Haiti, and capitalist Mexico, and capitalist Indonesia, and capitalist India. I said, no, most of the world is capitalist, and most of the world is living in desperate poverty. What created our prosperity wasn't capitalism, but the democratic struggle against the powers and abuses of capitalism. To the extent that we do have any kind of freedom and procedural democracy, it was because of people fighting for their rights, working men fighting for their rights, women fighting. In this gradual, responsive, open society, it took a mere 100 years for the women to get the vote. 100 years of getting battered and spit on and arrested and force-fed in prisons and all that. So there it is. No, they had to wrench and take every gain that we made. Everything we ever fought for, you see, was something which we got not because of the capitalists, but despite them. They opposed the 8-hour day. They opposed the extension of the franchise. They opposed the abolition of child labor. They opposed environmental controls. They opposed the secret ballot. They opposed Social Security and pension funds and disability insurance and survivors insurance. They opposed all of those things. They've opposed, and they're still opposing all of those things. They oppose worker safety. They want to rescind the occupational safety laws. They fought tooth and nail with every bit of miserly, miserable greed, ungiving, unforgiving, unrelenting against every decent thing that we've had. And to credit capitalism for the things that they have opposed is to really get your head screwed on wrong. Why don't Americans work for 18 cents an hour the way they do in Indonesia? Is it because we're just too much more self-respecting than those Indonesians? It's because we're at a level of historical and political and democratic struggle that they haven't reached, that their democratic struggle has been successfully suppressed with the aid of the U.S. national security state. And people work at that level there. So of course people in Indonesia look at the U.S. and say, you know, that's not such a bad deal. We're put in just a mere 10 hours a day in somebody's kitchen in a luncheonette and come home with more than $3. That would be a step up. Maybe get my kid into a public school where the child has no chance here. Yeah, sure. So America is the envy. But you know, in 1890, the U.S. was a third world country. More than half a century before the term was ever invented, the U.S. was a third world country. We had child labor. We had 14-hour work days. We had no social services. We had no social benefits. We had typhoid epidemics and tuberculosis and other diseases, cholera, diseases of the poor. We had no public housing, very little public education, no public libraries to speak of. Andrew Carnegie set up the first public libraries, big benefactor of capitalism. He did it because his name was in mud. People hated his guts, so he built these little stone things. Public library, by donation by Andrew Carnegie. He didn't put any books in them. The books someone else had to worry about. But he wanted the brick and mortar where he could put his name up there, you see. And those were the days when capitalism worked much better than it does today in America, where your investment got you a much higher rate of return. And that's why they're moving from Ohio or Michigan to Indonesia or Guatemala, to get that suppressed cheap labor in those undemocratic countries where the death squads work, where the police rap you if you try to organize and step out of line. I was looking at El Salvador, you know, and I was astonished to see who's in El Salvador. You know who's there? General Motors, General Electric, Microsoft, Firestone. And I'm saying, what's in El Salvador? A little bit of sugar, some bananas? What are these big multinational corporations doing in El Salvador? Well, they're there for that other ingredient that creates wealth, the thing that really adds that extra surplus value, and that's the human labor. They're there, and Salvadorans are working for, maybe it's not 18 cents, maybe it's more like 50 cents an hour, 20, 30 cents an hour. They're working and they're making everything from computers to energy rods to rubber tires and everything else to be exported and used elsewhere. So this is what we're facing. So we have this prosperity. It's very tenuous. It's very unequally distributed. And we have this freedom along with a lot of repression. I mean, it is true. It's not all fascism everywhere. A good analysis makes distinctions. It doesn't blur them. There are some countries where a meeting of this size would be machine gunned and everybody, the survivors, would be thrown into prison or whatever else. Compliments of the U.S. national security state. So the American people have achieved some modicum of liberties and prosperity against the ferocious opposition of the capitalist bureaucracy, which is constantly pushing its reactionary rollback, constantly trying to undo this and get us back to 1890. The poorer they can get us, the less resources we can have, less unemployment insurance, less Social Security, less public benefits or public services, the more we have to throw ourselves on the free market, naked, hungry, and the hungrier and the poorer you are, the harder you will work for less and less. The harder you work for less and less, that's more money for me. That's less money that I have to spend on stupid frills like paid vacations and medical care and occupational safety and those kind of things. They know what they're doing. Their goal is the third worldization of America. Their goal is the third worldization of everywhere, and they have been increasingly successful in places like the Middle East, which ties in with our story tonight. The standard explanation about why it happened the way it did is really wanting. Oh, let me just quote here. I found that I was searching around for from the radical newspaper called the New York Times. Recently reported, quote, "For 30 years the gap between the richest Americans and everyone else has been growing so much that the level of inequality is higher than in any other industrialized nation." And by the way, if you want to measure that gap, please don't do what everybody does. I have an article on my website which deals with that very thing. It's called "The Super Rich Are Out of Sight." It was originally published in Dollars and Cents, and then a different version was published in Z Magazine. Website, michaelparenti, one word, .org, with all little W's in front of it. And I point out, don't do this, the top 20% make this much, and the bottom 20% make that much, and the top 20% have gained this much more, and the bottom 20%. The top 20% are not the rich. They're not the people who own this country. The top 20%, to get in the top 20%, you make 60,000, 65,000, you're in the top 20%. That's upper middle class. 80% of Americans make less than $60,000 a year. That's, first of all. It's the top fraction of 1%. The spread, they say now, between the top quintile, 20%, and the bottom quintile is 13 to 1. And I sit there and say, what are they talking about? 13 to 1. I would settle for 13 to 1. The difference between Michael Eisner at Disney World, who makes $360 million in 1 year, and the porter, the janitor who comes in and swabs his office, is not, who makes $16,000 a year, it's not 13 to 1, it's more like 36,000 to 1. I mean, the super rich are so far out of sight, they don't even show up on the census. And the whole article is about the research I did, calling up the Census Bureau to ask them, where are the very, very rich in this? You only go up to an income of $100,000. So that 20% is 60,000 to 100,000. And well, actually not my research assistant would ask these questions. She's much better on the phone than I am. I tend to go, you know. And they said, well, that's all our computers could go. Well, spurred by our persistence, I don't know what this thing is here. Just leave it to distract me for... Spurred by our persistence, they have actually raised it from 100,000 to 1 million now. They look at 1 million. But 1 million still is not the very, very rich. Well, the standard explanation about why they attacked us doesn't hold water. It's not America's freedom. The terrorists didn't attack America's freedom. They didn't go hit the Statue of Liberty, as Ms. Roy pointed out. They didn't hit the Statue of Liberty. They went and hit the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Those are the symbols of U.S. economic and military domination. So the target really wasn't U.S. freedom and democracy, but Washington's record of support for exactly the opposite things: militarism and economic autocracy. The explanation leaves something unmentioned. It leaves unmentioned the exploitation of state-sponsored terrorism perpetrated by U.S. leaders against people all over the globe. It treats terrorism only as something that others do to us. What I would do is I would make a distinction between the causalities of this terrorism. Aristotle makes a distinction between the efficient cause and the conditional cause. Or today we would talk about the immediate cause and the structural cause, or the conditional cause, whatever. The immediate cause is a coterie of fanatical evildoers driven by a deranged theology, a deranged reading of their theology, who killed thousands of people by plowing plane loads of innocent individuals into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. But there's an underlying set of conditional causes. And one of the things, the people who want to just focus on that, one of the things they do is decontextualize it. Just treat it as an aberrant thing that just came like a bolt of evil out of nowhere. And one of the things we try to do is contextualize it and say, yeah, but why did this happen? Is it that they're just deranged? The other underlying set of conditional causes is the exploitation and injustices that Western leaders and investors have delivered upon other people. The role of the U.S. national security state as the prime purveyor of poverty, injustice, and repression in the Middle East and other regions of the world. A consideration of the conditional causes doesn't mean that we are apologizing for the immediate cause or for that particular act. The African-American writer Madison Shockley, he was asked this question: why do people around the world hate us so much? And he said, quote, arrogance, dominance, exploitation, oppression, racism, militarism, imperialism. Shall I go on? As long as we continue to thwart the aspirations for freedom and dignity for so much of the third world, there will be those who resent us and some who hate us. Retired Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Air Force, former rocket scientist Robert Bowman, by the way, who ran as a candidate for presidential nomination in the Reform Party in this last election. You never heard of him. Many people, I'll bet. Everybody heard about Pat Buchanan and the other ones, all the other right-wingers. Bowman was remarkable. He had a remarkable progressive agenda. He got zero media. So not only do third-party candidates get shut out of the major media, but even when a third party is looked at as an oddity like the Reform Party was, candidates in there who are progressives get shut out. So this is what Bowman says. He says the United States was targeted not because it stands for freedom and human rights, as Bush says, but because it stands for dictatorship, bondage, and human exploitation in the world. We are the target of terrorists because we are hated, and we are hated because our government has done harmful things. Now, I like that last phrasing, our government, and not we. We do this and we do that, and we got to stop saying that we. We go in and we kill everybody there, and we do this. Just about every noted major progressive speaker, author, writer is in the bad habit of saying we. I won't even give any names, but they're all across the country, from Cambridge right across to California, and they say we. We do this, we do that. I know one who even used both we's. I mean, the trouble with saying we is you are creating a community of interest between these policymakers, the U.S. leaders, and us. That's just what they want. One of the people is always saying, we is George Bush. We have got to fight, we have got to help, we've got to really get out there, and we've got to pursue this and continue and stick with this we, you know. The other thing it does is it deprives us of our we. We are against this. I was going to say, I heard one noted progressive speaker who used both we's in the same sentence, saying, we have got to stop what we are doing in Central America. We have got to oppose what we are doing to us. To we. To we. Okay. Well, Parenti, what are you doing? You're blaming America again. I'll just blame America. No, not America. I don't blame America. I just said I don't say we. Other people, another noted progressive speaker who I remember him saying, I blame you, I blame me, I blame everybody in this room. And everybody in the room applauded. MIT liberals, they love to be blamed for things. I saw it on tape. America is a huge and diverse entity of 281 million people. I don't blame America. I don't see Americans marching out in the street and saying, let's destroy the surplus and use it on more missiles to go kill weak, starving people in other remote countries. Have you seen many demonstrations like that? Have you? Let's roll back the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and Social Security. Let's get rid of it. Let's march. Let's go do that. Do we do that? Do we really? Let's build up a more secret national security state and death squads in Latin America where we can kill union leaders and peasant leaders and student leaders and clergy and anyone else who argues against the status quo. Let's go out there and do that. Less taxes for the rich, more taxes for us. Come on, let's get that. Let's begin. Have you seen the millions out there marching on Washington or someplace else or in your neighborhood? Have you? No, you haven't. I know the answer was so obvious you didn't want to answer it. So we're not blaming we're not blaming America, we're blaming the U.S. national security state and the agenda that they have. In fact, rather than blaming America, I think I constantly point out this violates the interests of America, the real us. I'll tell you who. I'll give you two people who blame America. Osama bin Laden. He says all the evil in the world is because of America, the Americans, and the Jews. I mean, this is this right-wing, reactionary, capitalist religionist, Osama bin Laden. Another right-wing, reactionary, capitalist religionist, Jerry Falwell. He says he blamed America too. He said, he said the chickens are coming home to roost. This is we've lost our moral way, and this has really been a terrible thing, you know. And I'm watching this. I'm saying this guy sounds like Osama bin Laden. So look at this Christian leader and this Muslim leader. I mean, God certainly does work His wonders in mysterious ways here. These two who would hate each other. I mean, you got Christians and Muslims killing each other right now, shooting it out. I mean, I'm talking shooting it out from Nigeria to the Philippines. We're talking like killing, you know, out there, knocking off each other's villages and people and pitched battles. But these two guys are in agreement on it. Well, it's not America. It's not the Americans. I said they weren't marching. It's certainly not the Jews. Jewish Americans often play a very vital role in all the decent movements that we have here for social progress and fair play and social justice. This festering setting up of these kinds of false enemies. Let's look at the world, really. Some 1.5 billion people in the world live in absolute economic desperation, and the number is growing. The number of people living in poverty is growing at a faster rate than the world's population, which means that poverty is spreading. the amount of wealth is accumulating at a faster rate. Now there's a relationship between those two things that's never looked at. Again and again, what we hear people do is say, what an unfortunate juxtaposition. So much wealth and so much poverty. Why should there be so much poverty amidst so much wealth? These two things here together, isn't that terrible? If only we could do something. But they're there together as a reason. It's not just an embarrassing juxtaposition. There's a dynamic interrelationship between the two. You don't have rich slave owners living in lavish wealth on the plantations of ancient Rome or the antebellum South. You don't have that unless you got slaves who can work all day and create that surplus value that allows those people up in the big White House to live in the manner to which they're accustomed. You don't have great feudal lords living in opulence in their castles if you don't have serfs working hard. And you don't have plutocrats and rich people gathering in and plundering the public treasure and plundering their own corporations and plundering the wealth if you don't have workers who are working a whole lifetime to work, and at the end of it barely have a little pension, maybe not even have enough to survive in any kind of comfort, while these other people have more money than they know what to do with. If they spend it, if they got up in the morning and just spent it, lit their cigars with $1,000 bills, they couldn't spend it all. Bill Gates, right? Almost a hometown guy. That's Seattle, sorry. All right. He's taken a hit, actually, Bill Gates. I was reading that. He was $85 billion. And he's down to $65 billion. I mean, I really felt bad. Yeah, I mean, it showed we are a compassionate people, we are here. I was actually going like that. Come on, just come down another 64.9.82 billion or something. Well, anyway, is this thing being videotaped too, is it? Oh, I shouldn't be making all those gestures, should I? The deepening impoverishment in the debtor nations, which are deeper and deeper into debt, to the point where the debt becomes its own dynamic, this fuels increasing popular resentment and rebellion. Democratic, progressive, leftist groups emerge. They begin to mobilize large sectors of the population, and they mobilize toward change. They mobilize against the economic servitude imposed by Western interests. They mobilize for a better life, land distribution, all these other things, public services. These democratic movements have been crushed by domestic military forces, or sometimes by outside invasion, as in the case of Yugoslavia, by the U.S. Military forces funded and advised by the U.S. national security state. In some countries, the CIA has actually employed right-wing fundamentalists to lead the assault against godless secular reformism and materialistic communism, quote, quote, quote. In Yemen, in Bosnia, in Kosovo, in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Turkey, in Egypt, even Iraq, what you've got is the destruction of democratic reform movements. And with the left defeated, then malignant strains of Islamic fundamentalism are now filling the gap, you know. Pauses. Young Muslim men and women live in countries that are more repressive than they were 20 years ago, less hopeful. The young men are often better educated than their elders. They depart their villages to seek work. They arrive in noisy, crowded cities like Cairo, Beirut, Damascus. They see great disparities of wealth, the disorienting effects of modernity. They witness unveiled women sitting in cafes. They see children begging in streets. And everywhere there's the crass glitter of Western secular materialism and cultural imperialism, little of which they can acquire themselves. They're both attracted and repelled by it all, frustrated and resentful, denied all democratic outlets for protest and change. These alienated youth move toward a resurgent, totalizing religious fervor, a militant Islam in the Middle East. And the U.S. goes on suppressing all around Latin America, Africa, Asia, a left military reform government, as in Portugal. It was so hopeful. I was in Portugal in 1970. When was that? 75, 76. The MFA, it was a MFA, which overthrew the Salazar dictatorship that had been supported by the U.S., these young military leaders. It was crushed, it was undermined by the CIA, destabilized. Or in Panama, the left military reform government under Torrio, and even under Noriega. It could be a Christian socialist government, as in Nicaragua under the Sandinistas, destroyed by the U.S. along with that country. A social democracy, Popular Front kind of coalition government, as in Chile under Salvador Allende, or in Jamaica under Michael Manley, in Greece under Papandreou in 1965, in the Dominican Republic under Juan Bosch, a Marxist-Leninist government, as in Cuba, Vietnam, and North Korea, an Islamic revolutionary order, as in Libya under Gaddafi, or even a conservative militarist regime, as in Iraq under Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was CIA. He was brought in by the CIA. His job was to destroy the reformist leftist movement. He destroyed the Kurdish Progressive Party. He destroyed the Iraqi Communist Party. He destroyed and murdered even the left wing of his own Ba'athist Party. But he also then started committing certain sins. Instead of being an obedient Comprador ruler, you know what the Comprador ruler is. He's the guy who says, come on in, boys, it's all yours. All yours. Take any land you want, drive the peasants off it, we'll help you. I'll bring my troops in and we'll take... There's no occupational safety laws, there's no minimum wage laws. They try to organize labor unions, we'll kill them. You come on in, take it. The resources, the labor, anything you want, we'll build it up the way you want, we'll tear it down the way you want. You just give me a bit of the cut, you give my brother Jose some, and you give my family and my generals, and we'll let you have this country as you want. Saddam Hussein started doing something else. He started training his engineer cadres. He started putting in education, some public health. These are the things, and, you know, the U.S. was saying, hey, why do you think we got you to kill all those other people? That's what they were going to do. And then he started getting out of line on oil prices and that sort of thing, wanted a better cut on the oil prices. So there's no room for somebody like that, an economic nationalist. The public record shows that the U.S. is the foremost interventionist power in the world. And if we want to talk about evil, let's also talk about U.S. leaders as being the active promoters and protectors of drug traffickers who serve the gangster functions of U.S. policy. In the 1940s, the CIA cut a deal with the Corsica Mafia and the Sicilian Mafia, drug mafias, to go out and destroy the longshoremen unions because they were communist-led. Those were good unions, those were militant unions, well-organized. Their leaders were incorruptible and dedicated, and that was what was wrong about them, is that they were incorruptible. They really were serving the interests of their own workers. And for doing that, the Corsica and Siciliana Mafia got a free hand in exporting heroin all through Western Europe and into the U.S. A pact with the devil. Southeast Asia drug lords using them. Active collaboration in the Golden Triangle with the CIA transport planes bringing in the stuff itself. Afghanistan, the warlords there who produced the opium poppy that created about 80% of the world's supply of heroin. Again, in collusion with the CIA to fight off the Soviet invasion, as they called it. I don't call it a Soviet invasion. There was a left military government that took over in Kabul. It was under siege from Pakistan and the CIA. Ziggy Brzezinski admits that the US was in that country 6 months before the Soviets ever came in. That government put in repeated appeals to Moscow to please send troops in. The Russians, the Soviets were very nervous about doing that. They finally did. They lost the war. But that government, that Soviet puppet government of the Soviet invasion, that government was doing things like putting in a minimum wage law, legalizing labor unions, advancing the programs for women's education, which had already started under the king, it's true, but really putting it on a mass basis, public education for all children, and land redistribution. And that's why that government was hated. It was dangerous. It was moving toward that different kind of world. That's not the world that the U.S. national security state is dedicated to. The world that the U.S. national security state is dedicated to is one in which the land, the labor, the markets, the technology, and the capital are used for the capital accumulation process for the benefit of that privileged few, that 1 or 2%. As against those of us who want the land, the labor, the technology, the capital, and the markets to be used for the collective well-being of the people and the development of the people in all countries. And isn't it interesting that now the Taliban are gone? In Afghanistan, the warlords are back, and heroin production is up again. There's the good news. And rapes are up again. It's good news, isn't it? I mean, it really is something. It takes something to make the Taliban start looking good, you know. Let's go on about drugs. Nicaragua Contras, John Hull, cocaine, shipments into America, CIA planes going down with arms and guns for the Contra mercenaries and coming back with drugs. Dick Gregory once talked about that. He said they're saying about 25 planes a week are coming in from Central America filled with cocaine. That explained the cocaine epidemic of the 1980s. You know, cocaine used to be a very expensive drug. I remember it when I just remember it. I remember it when it was a very respectable drug. When it was used by lawyers in New York and Hollywood producers and people like that, it was called a recreational drug. It was a recreational drug. But you know, it got so cheap, they're bringing it out on the streets. It destroyed black communities, and that's what they wanted to do. So to say, what a terrible mistake, how stupid, don't we realize it is that? That's what they wanted to do. They saw they were scared, they got scared. They saw those black youth in the 60s organizing into the Black Panthers, organizing housing programs, school lunch programs, bringing up revolutionary analyses. They don't want that. They want these youth. They saw that in the Chicano, Latino community, the Brown Berets and others doing this sort of. They saw them getting politicized. And these groups sometimes said, young lords said that in Chicago, they said, we had less trouble from the police when we were stealing cars and shooting each other up and breaking into stores and stealing stuff. Now that we've gotten politicalized, we've cleaned up our act and we're getting political and all this, the police are down on us all the time, the Red Squads in Chicago. That's exactly the point. They want these youth shooting each other up with guns and themselves up with needles, you see. And that was the goal. That cocaine came in from Central America. Dick Gregory said 25 planes a week. He said, now do you suppose if the Russians were bringing in 25 plane loads of spies a week, nobody would be able to stop them? Because it was said, we can't stop them. America's such a big country. And we don't know where they go. I don't have an idea. I have no idea where they go. And that kind of collusion between the U.S. national security state and the U.S. imperialists with the drug traffickers goes on today. The Kosovo Albanians hold the largest share of the heroin market. I'm quoting. Kosovo Albanians hold the largest share of the heroin market in Switzerland, Austria, Belgium, Germany, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Norway, and Sweden. Where did I get that? From another radical publication, the San Francisco Chronicle, awful newspaper. And the San Francisco Chronicle of 5 May 99 was quoting Interpol, okay? You don't get any more establishment than this international organization of police. They're announcing that these Kosovar mafia, KLA mafia, was involved up to their ears in the drug trade. And by the way, with many links to the Mujahideen and Islamic extremists. Well, oh, I don't know. I think I've said most of this. Let's see. What we're facing is the globalization campaign to third worldize the entire world. Now, globalization, there's two different theories of globalization. One is the one presented by the globalizationists, the globalists, and they represent this as a natural phenomenon, a benign and beneficial phenomenon, an inevitable one. Inevitable. You say, you know, in the early days we had local economies, and then we had regional economies, and then it grew to national economies, and then international, and now it's going to be just one global economy, which me and my friends will run and own. They'd leave out that last little phrase. And those who are against globalization are pointing out that yes, it's true that capitalism has always gone everywhere and recreated every place in its own image, but there's something else that's happening here that's even more pernicious, and that is, this is not natural, this is not benign, this is a forced, contrived system which is circumventing whatever democratic sovereignty we have won in that 2 centuries of struggle, and it's setting up these autocratic trade councils staffed by people from industries with no conflict of interest provision, with no accountability, elected by nobody, self-co-opted, self-appointed, self-perpetuating, which can now overrule the laws of just about every country and privatize everything, destroy the entire public sector. That's the goal that they're doing. That's the final step under GATS, not GATT, but GATS, General Agreement on Trade and Services. And the FTAA has got this all slipped in there. That's why we've got to defeat that fast track in the Senate. That's our last hope. It not only will wipe out the public sector and wipe out good environmental laws and overrule them, but it will wipe out our very right to fight for such laws and have them. So what they're doing is a global coup d'etat. They're not destroying the democratic forms that let us have our vote in our elections, to some degree, you know, depending on what state and how close the vote is, you know. And they're just circumventing and going around it and making those elections largely irrelevant. Well, what we need to do, ladies and gentlemen, is move away from a liberal complaint about how bad things are and toward a radical analysis which explains why they're that way and why they move in that direction. Who is benefiting from this? What we need to do is to move away from chuckling about how stupid George Bush is and give a little more attention to how vicious he is, how effectively vicious he is. Remember when Bush almost got elected, the pundits were saying, well, you know, he's going to have to move with a certain measure and a certain reserve because he doesn't really have a consensus, and he's going to have to carefully build a consensus and so forth. He doesn't have very strong support. That isn't what he did. He's like a bunch of thieves. They stole the election, they got in through the back door, and they're taking everything that isn't nailed down. In fact, they're ripping up the plumbing too. They're taking it all. They're trying to rip it off. They're not... They're not conservatives, they're reactionaries. They have a reactionary agenda which is to get us back to 1890. What we need is a global anti-imperialist movement that can challenge the dominant model, the dominant paradigm, the dominant agenda, whatever you want to call it, with an alternative one. We need one that circumvents the monopoly ideological control of officialdom, corporate America, and the corporate media. And people always say to me, what do you have, a conspiracy theory? All the time I hear this. Conspiracy theory, you know. You think they actually are planning? I say, yeah, they're planning. Yes, of course, they're planning this. What do you think they're doing? I mean, but isn't that remarkable? Could someone think, where does that come from? I mean, I know it comes up in the newspapers, but where does that come from? I was speaking at a high school in the Bay Area, and a student, I didn't even broach the subject because I didn't even think they had picked up on that yet. This student, he must have been 12th grader or something. He said, well, I mean, do you really think there's a group of men actually sitting around in a room? And go like that. And I hear that all the time too. He's sitting around in a room like that. It's a very devastating image. Oh, sitting around in a room? No, they couldn't be sitting around in a room. I say, no, they meet on carousels and, so, what do you think it's about? I don't know. Or they do skydiving. You see those guys holding them? What are we going to do with the Uruguay round? Yeah, let's pass another law. Yeah, let's do this. You'll slip it by. Of course they sit around in rooms. Where the hell else do you think they're going to meet? They got a lot of rooms. They've got a lot of rooms. They got rooms in Langley, Virginia. They got rooms in the White House. They got rooms at the Bohemian Grove. They got rooms at the Knickerbocker Club in New York. They've got rooms at the Council for Foreign Relations. They got rooms at the Bilderberg Conference. They got rooms at the Trilateral Commission. Nobody confabulates and plans and plots the way the ruling interests of this country and the other capitalist nations do. Of course they're doing that all the time. And what we've got to do is develop an anti-imperialist movement, because they're sitting on our shoulders. Don't think for a moment they're not interested in what you think. Oh, they don't care about us. Oh boy, do they care. Do they care? Do they have us under surveillance? Are they nervous? They know whose shoulders they're sitting on. They know what happens if the people really begin to move and shrug, how wobbly it gets up there. Look right now. Dick Cheney won't even tell us who his boyfriends are in Enron. We not only need an anti-imperialist movement, but we already have one. In Seattle, we saw it against the WTO. In Washington, D.C., against the international, the IMF and the World Bank. In Prague, in Sydney, Australia, in Philadelphia, in Los Angeles, in Geneva, in I met Quebec City. We've seen these movements going, and they call us agitators. They're trying to call us terrorists now. What a joke. It hasn't frightened the people. There was a little space of time after September 11, quietude, but we are back out and we're at it again. They call us these names. I have another word for it. I call it democracy. Democracy, democracy. The struggle continues. The struggle continues against all odds, against enormous odds, as in the past, against enormous odds, against the powerful Morgans and Mellons and Rockefellers and Huntingtons and DuPonts and all those people, against all their power, all their agents, all their newspapers in the 1890s, in the 20th century, against all monopoly propaganda, against all their lies and deceptions and suppression and threats. Against the most hopeless situations, we've won victories in the past, and we're going to win them in the future. We've got to let them know there's no going back to 1890, there's only going forward, and we have to make the future our future, not their future. Thank you, brothers and sisters.